Welcome to the Paranormal Pendle podcast, coming to you from the heart of Pendle Witch Country in the northwest of England. My name is Craig Bryant, author, investigator and collector of stories. Join me as we take a journey into the paranormal, UFO sightings, cryptozoology and big cats. This is the Paranormal Pendle podcast. Welcome to episode 39 of Paranormal Pendle, broadcasting to the Paranormal UK network at paukradio.com. So my guests on this episode, and that's guests as in plural, so I've got two guests on this episode. Returning guest is Nicholson, who I think if I remember rightly, Lee, you were my second ever guest.
Yeah.
Going back quite a few. Well over a year now, I think. And David Cayton. David, welcome. First time guest on the podcast.
Yes, very nice to be here, Craig. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Thanks for coming on. As you're the new guest, David, would it be possible for you just to sort of tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background and your interests?
Yes, okay. Well, obviously, some event in Cyprus when I was in the RAF. I was served for 10 years, but I spent 2.5 years of that in Cyprus at the Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Centre, Middle East, a place called Piscopi, not far from Limassol. And I was a photographer. And for a spell, we had to have a photographer up on the Tudos Mount Olympus radar site to photograph the screens, because we were tinkering around with some then secret over the horizon radar, and a UFO event took place. It wasn't me up there at that time, it was a colleague of mine, Barry Porter, who's now deceased sadly, who witnessed the whole carry on and took his camera in the radar room, expecting to photograph the thing. Anyway, that's another story its own. I'm married, been married for 43 years, I think. Got three daughters, 7 grandchildren. Range from 3 to 2.5 to 12.
Right. Okay.
I worked for, after I left the Air Force in 1965, I joined British Aerospace, who was then in Chadderton. And then we moved to the Woodford plant later on, in the Engineering Research Department. And in the Air Force, well, in my last posting, I was lucky enough to get involved in non-destructive testing, which involves using radiography and ultrasound and other methods to find cracks and corrosion in aircraft structures and components.
Okay.
So I did this radiographic course with one or two other photographers that were that desperate because it was a new thing, progressing very fast. But when I was demobbed, I applied for photographic work, but there wasn't anything available. They realised from my CV from the Air Force about this radiography thing. So I was employed in the laboratory doing X-ray work, and that progressed. And after 3 years, I think 1970, thereabouts, our boss decided to leave the company and form his own private NDT company. And because of a certain ministry and CEA approvals attained in these practices, in the meantime, I was promoted to head of the NDT, which I did for 20-odd years, 22 years.
Yeah.
Early retirement in 1993. Because of my interests from way back in 1958 of the UFO stuff, I approached Quest International and spoke to Tony Dodd, who was then the Director of Research and Investigations. If you wanted an investigator for the Greater Manchester area, I sent him a bit of a CV thing, and he said, "Oh, yes, please," and I was signed up in no time.
That's where your interest in UFOs stems from. Then, is it going back to the 1950s?
Yeah, 58 it was.
Right.
I always had open-minded before that. I was believed that we couldn't be alone.
So what? Sorry, what was the incident then, David, that sort of set all this off?
Right. Well, this was August 58, about 6 o'clock in the morning. Barry realised there was some commotion going on in the radar room and went in with his camera on the ready and found that they had this object on radar which had come up from Alexandria, near Cairo direction.
Yeah.
Heading northwards, roughly speaking, across the Med. And it was doing about 8,000 miles an hour, which is pretty fast for 1958, let's face it.
Yeah.
Anyway, it did an abrupt 90-degree turn northwest, back more closer to the coast of Cyprus, the west coast of Cyprus. It was also on radar in Libya, a place called El Adam, which we used to have as a base post the war, World War II. And it was also on radar at RAF Lucca in Malta, right down the other end of the Met. So it must have been a pretty big object.
Mm.
Anyway, we scrambled 2 QRA, that's quick reaction alert, Hawker Hunters, spiders from headquarters at Nicosia, who dispatched to intercept this object, which was at 38,000 feet altitude at the time. And then as the 2 jets approached, well, it stopped dead, it stopped moving in an instant.
Mm.
And when it made a move, that turn must have pulled 30-odd Gs, I would think, if not more.
Mm.
And then it jumped immediately to 60,000 feet in a flash of a second.
Oh.
And the Hunter aircraft couldn't achieve that altitude back then, but they were sent back to base. So it then proceeded westwards, went across the 40 miles of ocean towards Turkey, and increased its speed to 18,000 miles an hour. Get that, 18,000 miles an hour.
Okay.
And it went over Turkey to the, what's it see? Well, heading towards Soviet Russia, generally speaking, and eventually off radar. Now, about 8 o'clock that morning, a wing commander, which was quite a rank, it drove up the tortuous mountain road from Nicosia, lined everyone up, including Barry, and reminded them, "You all signed official secrets act, lads, so you don't mention this to anybody, especially the media." So I thought, considering that the MOD have poo-pooed it all and saying no defence significance and all that jazz, according to Nick Pope. Well, because we didn't know about Nick Pope in 1958, but years later I thought, if there was nothing to it, why did they dispatch this wing commander to warn off all the witnesses at the Troodos radar site? And I presume similarly the radar people in Malta and Libya would also be warned off. So that was that. But the day before, I'll just throw this one in, unbeknown to me at the time, and only known more recently because the guy who was retired as a group captain, some rank, of course, group captain, flying as a squadron leader then, one of our Avro Shackletons around Cyprus. He was based in Malta at Lucca, and he'd done his stint of going around the coast of Cyprus looking for Greek Cypriot gunboats, bringing arms in for the Yoka terrorists, which was going on at the time. And then they were flying back up the Med. They went to Akatiri, picked up the ground crew. So I had 16 people aboard, crammed in the Shackleton, which is like an upgraded Lancaster, if you get an idea of that sort of thing, 4-engine prop aircraft. And they're just off Crete. It's now getting dawn time. Anyway, some of the people noticed there was an object on the left, on the port wing, with a red light, you see. So they thought about some other aircraft and realised if it's on the port, they should be looking at a green light. On the aircraft wings, the starboard is green, port is red.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was following the aircraft at their speed, probably only doing, I don't know, 200 miles an hour, not much more, about 12,000 feet or something, because it wasn't pressurized. So the captain couldn't see it from his passenger seat because of the wing and the engines. So on the top of the shack, there's a observation dome in the middle of the fuselage, which used to be a gun turret on Lancaster days.
Yeah.
And he ordered every man to go up and climb up into this observation thing. And he wanted everyone to witness it. And then what he did then, he dived to Shackleton and then pulled the stick back suddenly. So he suddenly lost a lot of speed. And he managed to get behind the object. Short, few seconds, but long enough to see this was a cylindrical thing with the red light on the nose, which was about 30 feet long by 12-foot diameter, they estimate. And as soon as he did that, it jumped back to the same position on its port wing. So he radioed forward to, on the secret NATO frequency, to Malta, and they scrambled to javelin aircraft, 19 Scepter javelins, Gloucester javelins, to come and catch up with him down the middle of the Med. And as the javelins approached at higher altitude, apparently they could see this object off his wing, and as they come down to close on the aircraft, it shot up vertically in a flash and away. When they all got back to Lucca, every man was individually interviewed by men in grey suits and told not to button lip, not mention it. So they within 48 hours, there was 2 major events. I'll never know whether that object, it was seen on radar at Lucca, but I don't know whether they found it in Cyprus radar. But anyway,
yeah,
it matters. There's 2 objects doing peculiar things.
Yeah, I was going to say the way that they were behaving, certainly the first one that you described, that's your sort of classic manoeuvring, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Where they're sort of stopping on a sixpence and they're turning at 45 degrees and you know, high acceleration beyond anything that you know we have. I say we. I'm talking about human beings, not the RAF.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean that is really quite interesting. I mean, have you heard of those 2 stories, Lee? I'm conscious that you've been sat in the background just listening away.
No, that's fine. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, I've heard them from David actually, but I think one of them was documented in the magazine years ago. Am I right, David? The UFO magazine.
Probably
the Shackleton case, maybe. But yeah, very impressive. I mean, nowadays they call them UAP observables, don't they? But
yes, yes,
yeah,
classic performance characteristics. Yeah,
and you mentioned David about Nick Pope. I'm just wondering whether you knew him, whether you'd ever met him then.
I met him at a Quest conference. Right. Graham Beardsley rang in Leeds. It was 2001, I think. Right. It was the first talk I'd given on the animal mutilations.
All right.
And he wasn't happy at all. We ended up sharing a breakfast table in the hotel, actually, the morning before the first day of the conference. And he was all shuffling about. He was uncomfortable. Obviously didn't know how to respond, with any significant comments about the animal mutilation phenomena.
Yeah.
So I can't say we got on very well.
No.
So we were polite and all the rest of it, but yeah. And also was also at the conference giving a speech was Dr. Stephen Greer.
Right.
And he realised what I was going to talk about, and we met up in the hotel lobby when Graham asked me to round people up for the minibus to take us to the conference venue, and he had a bit of a go at me.
Right, okay.
Very lofty, I know it all, you know nothing sort of attitude. And I realised as years have gone on, and he's still at it, that he believes all the mutilations are done by American military or specialist groups, not done by ET, because he doesn't like the ETs to be seen as bad, rather than bad. And considering the number, I mean, Tony Dodd said, I think there must be 30 at least types of extraterrestrial species, all at different levels of technology, coming from different places, different sorts of craft. So Stephen Greer wasn't having that at all. He wanted to put me down and put the whole subject of mutilations down because it didn't suit his agenda.
Well, that's interesting that theory that he has, because you have to wonder what American special forces would be doing up a moor in Todmorden in West Yorkshire.
Yes,
because that's how myself and Lee we first got to know each other, isn't it, Lee? Through that case that happened now a couple of years ago. I mean, did you have any dealings with that at all, David? And Lee, has anything come to light since we last chatted about that, or has that one sort of gone to bed?
I had the pleasure of talking to Lee about it, and the chap who stumbled across the calf port. Albert Tyus took some excellent photographs, which makes a change.
He did. Yeah,
don't do it. And then I got to know of it from, what was that lady's name? Lee?
Deborah Hatswell.
Deborah Hatchwell. I spoke to her.
Yeah.
And she put me in touch with Lee. So I got to see the pictures, which I have on file.
Yeah.
And we deduced, or I'm confident, it's the same farmer who lost his calf. He never made any inquiries. The calf was never moved. He never reclaimed the carcass. But some years earlier, I'd been to his farm, which was shared with a lady who lived next door, the land. And he'd had Robert Hulse and I went to view a sheep, a mature ewe, who had got throat and face injuries, typical things. And eventually I got out of the farmer a confession. A year or two after that event, he'd had 2 or 3 others, but he never, despite his promises, he never let me know. He was obviously very unhappy about it and disbelieving that he wanted it to be some natural predator or something. So he's been in trouble with DEFRA about health issues on his farm, I learned. Right. So he wasn't out to help us for any future cases.
So he didn't want people poking around then, did he not?
No, I suppose not.
No, I mean, I know quite a few farmers because I live in a particular rural area around here, and I do know quite a few farmers, and they can be very secretive about everything, really. And if DEFRA had been poking around, obviously, then he wouldn't want sort of any indication that there might, there might have been any malpractice on his part.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's one of the reasons we chose. So I really wrote the whole thing up as an article recently, and that's one of the reasons we chose to keep his name out of it, because we did identify the farmer.
Yeah.
It wasn't immediately around the 2020 period. It was more like 2011, I think.
Right.
When the charges were brought against him.
Right. Yeah. But he would still obviously be quite aware of those, wouldn't he, and quite wary of people getting involved.
Yeah, I mean, one interesting thing was we were looking for an ear tag because the ear was missing. And sometimes in these cases, the tag is left behind, strangely enough.
Yeah.
So we were looking for one. We didn't find one. But what we did discover, it was a couple of months after we first went to the site, was the herd that it was from, which was up near Gaddings Dam. And it was a mixed herd. with calves about the same age, so we could pretty certain. And I did get told who the farmer was who this herd belonged to, and none of them were tagged actually. So he's sort of skirting the regulations a little bit. So we didn't want to get him in trouble or anything like that.
Yeah. So is animal mutilations one of your I would say favourite subjects, David? But one of your, well, if I said pet subject, that'd be even worse, wouldn't it?
Pets have been involved, unfortunately.
Yeah. One of the subjects that you're interested in.
Yes, after 3 years of interviewing people about things seen in the sky for Quest International, very often I filed a report for Tony Dodd, got them dutifully filled in and all the rest of it, and that's the end of it. So you either believe that person of what they've witnessed or you don't, and you can't take it forward. That's it. So having found out about the mutilations partly from Tony Dodd, but also from Linda Moulton Howe in the States, and I met Linda a few times down in Wiltshire, because one of the things I was doing in the past was investigating seriously crop circles.
Okay.
For about 12 years, I joined the Centre for Crop Circle Research. And of course, I was, through a friend who used to work at British Aerospace, he knew what's his name? Oh, he introduced me to
Colin Andrews,
a gentleman.
no, down in Shropshire.
Well, it's okay. It's all right.
Come to me. My name's just
fine. I have the same problems with my memory, David. Don't worry.
Anyway, with him, we set up the APFU, Animal Pathology Field Unit.
Okay, right.
Phil Hoyle.
Phil Hoyle, thank you very much. Great. He had lots of personal experiences in abductions for many years. So he was aware of the animal stuff. And I got talking to him and we decided to try and form a group. And I think there was 4 or 5 of us for a while. But the others soon dropped out for various reasons, which I won't bore you with. But though one of them, he was obviously... When I gave that talk at the Quest conference in 2001, on the stage, when I was wrapping up and Graham Birdsall was getting a vote of thanks and rest of the audience, he said to everyone, there was 800 people there, 800. He said, David needs help on this. Is anyone willing to help catch up with me at the conference, you see? Well, this one person came forward in the audience, a very intelligent bloke, lived down south somewhere. Anyway, we concluded, particularly Phil Hoyle, who was more astute at spotting these people, he was quite clearly affiliated in some way with some government department, right, checking up to see how we were getting on looking at this animal stuff, because it was all hush-hush. And fobbed off and buried, forgiving the pun, and that's what they were doing. So, and also something happened one day when he was chasing me for some photographs of some of the bodies, and I rang him, and he answered the phone, which was a landline, and then while I was on the line, I heard a mobile ring, or might have been the other way around. So he put me on hold and walked down the passageway to the other phone. I could hear him say things like, yes, he's here right now. It's me. So whoever was orchestrating him or in charge of him doing what he was doing were anxious to get hold of any images I could provide, you see, and pass them on to him.
Right.
So that, to me, was a clue what he was up to. So we sort of dropped him out. It just ended up in the end with Phil Hoyle and Robert Hulse, who came with me to 1 or 2 events, locations to try and retrieve a carcass or whatever.
Right.
So, and the main thing is Phil devised the name Animal Pathology Field Unit, because using the word pathology, because neither of us were pathologists, obviously, but I was lucky enough to meet a professor of pathology who was criminal pathology from Manchester Uni on a BBC radio breakfast programme interview chat, which I got. Graham Birdsley got me to go because he couldn't make it, and I'm only like 8 miles from Manchester, the studios. And it was the morning after that bloody rake Santilli had released his so-called alien autopsy.
Oh, right, yeah.
And so the BBC had asked this professor and a colleague to view the programme the night before and come and make comments about what he thought of the procedures that the film showed. Now, we got sat around the table with the microphones. There was just 2 lady presenters, so we didn't know each other from Adam. And they did a bit of an introduction thing. There was a weather forecast and something or other. And previously, I'd spoken to the programme producer, making it quite clear to him that as a ufologist working for Quest as a whole, and a lot of work that Tony Dodd and Graham had done to disprove Ray Santilli's claim that this was a real military black and white movie film of a real alien having an autopsy.
Yeah.
But he failed, whether it was accidental or deliberate. He didn't inform that to the 2 lady presenters, who thought I was going to say, Eureka, here we've got the smoking gun. This is what we've been waiting for. And I would then enter cross swords with Professor Fremont. So while they were having their weather forecasts and the mics were off, passed a bit of paper across to say who he was, and I sent a bit back saying who I was, you see. So the whole programme, in terms of the discussion, fell a bit flat because there was no raised voices or argument between either of us about the alien autopsy film.
Yeah, which of course has been proved to be an absolute and utter complete hoax.
Yes, well, even the people that made the dummy have come forward since, haven't they? Some years ago, and admitted it.
I remember speaking to Philip Mantle about it a while ago. And
one time he was pushing it, Mantle.
Yeah.
Very early on,
Yeah, very early on.
So he was forced into a U-turn, was Philip Mantle.
Yeah. Interesting. So
that event just interrupted me.
Sorry, go on.
As we were going out, I said to Tony Fremont, if I got some animal carcasses or tissue, would you be prepared to help me? And he said, oh, yes, certainly. Well, after that, we arranged a meeting at my house. Tony Dodd came here to Stockport, and Tony Fremont came to join us. And Tony brought quite a few images, a lot of Linda Moulton Howe stuff, which we were passing round, and he was making comment. And what really got Professor Fremont going was Tony put his hand in his pocket, brought out the brown envelope with 3 or 4 pictures of that poor man in Brazil from 1988 who had all these mutilations. You remember him? It's a well-known case now, that 1988.
Right, I'm not actually familiar with that story, to be honest.
What the 1888 mutilation?
No, I haven't heard it. Do you want to sort of briefly go into what that was about?
Yes, right. So that Tony Fremont, his dander was really up, and he looked very closely, a long time, at these photographs that Tony Dodd had produced.
Yeah.
And he said, and I had a tape recording at the time with his permission. He said, like talking to himself or talking for his profession, he said, looking at the injuries, I don't see how we could do this. That was a very telling remark. He also said, because of some of the bluish stains around some of the holes in his thigh and his arms, and he said, that's a sign that the poor guy was alive at the time some of these injuries were done.
Right.
So it was like bleeding into the tissue, he said.
Yeah.
Because his heart was pumping, and it leaves this bluish stain under the skin, or showing through the skin. So that's the remarks she made. So when people say, "Oh, it's done by the military or wild animals," and all, I say absolute rubbish. So, and the information we've gathered since I've spent over 20 years looking at the animal mutilation stuff, principally, because it was very time consuming, traveling, putting adverts in the farming press to get information back from farmers, which is very difficult. There's a majority of them, because we're only looking at the tip of an iceberg, because the majority of farmers find one, they might be baffled, think, "Oh, I've lost a sheep or a lamb or whatever." They only get foxes to take them now and again. So it's part of farming life to lose an amount of stock through one reason or the other. And they would just bury it or send it to the drag hunt, and that was the end of that. So some farmers, when they've been onto a farm and have asked, I can tell pretty sure by their body language and things that they've had something, they know about it, but they wouldn't admit to me in a certain date or time scale they had a lamb or a sheep or a cow, whatever, found with these sort of injuries, because I used to take photographs to show them. And I put an advert in the farming press, which was agreed by Tony Fremont without mentioning his name, because unfortunately he eventually got warned off. And I'll tell you about that in a bit if you want. So I sort of decided that was what, and I got quite good results actually. The adverts cost £300 in the Farmers Weekly for 1 week in the classified section. £300 for a 2-column width. And the first one I did, Tim Good kindly paid the £300 for that. In fact, I got him a VAT certificate back, which I did. Richard D. Hall, who I've worked with on Rich Planet a few times, he paid for one for the, wasn't Farmers Weekly, it was Farmers Guardian. The Farmers Guardian was a more animal-orientated farming magazine than the Farmers Weekly. And then Graham Birdsall, bless his heart, paid for another advert in the Farmers Guardian. And they all produce some results. And I missed some animals by a week, some several weeks, some months, and some years. So the farmers recognised by my description what we're looking for. I didn't want them to waste time going for arriving, 70 odd miles or more to find it was just normal predation. And that seemed to work. But it was a costly thing to do each time. But it got me some results.
So what are your theories then, David, about what's causing these mutilations? I mean, is it extraterrestrial, or is there some predation by big cats, that sort of thing? What's your take on it?
Without a shadow of doubt, it's ETs. It's very highly advanced procedures. They're taking large organs through small holes in the body. Now, how they do that is another mystery. With no blood, there's no blood around the carcass. There's no blood on the carcass, apart from a bit of when the animal's been tipped over. Sometimes residual blood seeps out of the wound or the mouth, and because of the MO, it's pretty much the same. There's a pattern from animal to animal, and all species are affected worldwide. It's not just in America, as people like to thought or think at one time, or just wherever in Britain. It's all around the world, and the MO is the same. So much for Stephen Greer saying, "Oh, the American military are doing it to scare you off, to make a bad light, the ETs in a bad light, and they're these lovely extraterrestrials. We must communicate with them." All the meetings he has, getting people to try and make contact and all that jazz.
Yeah.
So I'm in no doubt there can't be anything else now, because I think we've exhausted all the other possible thing. And as for mutilation by another wild animal, I mean, when an animal predates on something, it does it to eat.
Yeah, yeah.
And the carcass will be a mess, teeth and claw marks, tissue all over the place, wool from a sheep scattered about, skin, and a lot of blood around too.
Yeah.
So there's no way are these, as Tony Fremont said, highly advanced medical procedures are not done by Mr. Fox or a dog, because dogs do attack sheep and lambs particularly.
Yeah.
So that's my take on it.
So, I mean, that brings us quite sort of nicely, really, to one of the questions I wanted to ask, which is about the recent disclosure evidence. So, obviously, different people within this particular sphere have different thoughts on the information that has been brought out in these hearings over in America. I mean, Lee, I'll start with you, because again, I'm conscious you've been sat there very patiently.
Lee is more into this and looked at it more carefully than me.
Yeah.
On David Grush's announcements and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So what's your thoughts on it, Lee?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's complicated, isn't it? I think that's part of the problem. I've had to learn quite a bit of American politics, just to understand what's going on. But if you take a step back, what was discovered years ago is that I don't know if you know about the story of Thomas Wilson, Admiral Wilson.
Okay.
And he was involved in a meeting with several people, including Dr. Greer, actually, but that was when he was doing some decent work. And Edgar Mitchell, the former astronaut. And the upshot of the meeting was they informed him about these particular projects that were going on involving crash recoveries of UFOs and reverse engineering. And they gave him enough information so he could go and check, basically. Yeah. And so he did. And a document leaked out a few years ago, which was a meeting between this guy and another person discussing what he learned, basically. And what he learned was that, I mean, this guy his next job was going to be head of the Defense Intelligence Agency at that time. So he was very high ranking. And what he learned was he was not allowed access, and that actually most of the government didn't have access. And what was happening was the federal government, the intelligence agencies and the military agencies were keeping it secret from the congressional side of government. And so the people who should have been informed weren't being. So this is exactly what Grush discovered years later when he was working for the task force.
Right.
So, so for people that don't know, David Grush was with the Air Force, he was with the National Geospatial Agency, and he was with the National Reconnaissance Office. And he got tasked, I think it was 2019, to join the UAP task force, which had been mandated by Congress at that time. And part of his job was to look for any projects that might be, duplicating the work, essentially. And that's where they discovered them. They actually knew where to look because of things that had happened previously. And Grush succeeded in interviewing 40 witnesses, I think is the figure that's going around now. People who worked inside these projects, people who have, knocked on crashed UFOs, seen the bodies and what have you.
Right. Yeah.
And he was, a little bit concerned and a little bit disturbed, if you will. And so as a result of his official investigation for the UAP task force, he experienced reprisals from the government. I think he went into work one day and his security clearance had been gone.
Right.
So his reaction to that was to go to, it's the ICIG, so it's the Intelligence Community Inspector General's office, and file an official complaint. And the complaint he filed was about these programs and the fact that they were being run without congressional oversight. So, in America, there's 8 members of Congress in the Senate who are the heads of various committees. They call them the Gang of 8. And they should have access to all classified projects, these special access programs. Yeah. They should have access, but they don't. They didn't. And this is what they discovered, you see. So this is what he considers illegal.
Right. Sorry. Would Project Blue Book be one of those then?
No, that was very much a public relations exercise, essentially.
Okay.
So it wasn't classified. The special access programs are the real deep black stuff.
Right.
Nobody talks about it, and usually aircraft development or weapons development or stuff like that.
So do you think that the president would have been kept out of the loop as well then, or whichever president, the number of presidents that have been over the years? Do you think all of them have been kept in the dark about this as well?
The information is that yes. Now, some of them may have received limited briefings about other aspects of the programs, like maybe sightings or something. One of the rumors is that Bush, the first Bush, he probably did get a briefing because of his position. He was deeply in the intelligence community anyway. So, but yeah, the rumors are that he was probably the last one to get
I mean, the reason that I ask, and I had a discussion with some other guests a few weeks ago about this, is that obviously there's certain more recent presidents find it very difficult to keep the mouth shut, or have found it very difficult to keep the mouth shut, and something like, I think we all know what I'm referring to, something like this, if because some of the rumors have been that presidents, one of the first things that they're briefed on when they become presidents of the United States is extraterrestrial contact. Now, if that was the case, there will have been certain presidents or presidents singular who find it quite difficult not to open the mouth and say the wrong things at the wrong time. So it would just seem that this information that's coming out was actually beyond even that of the office of president.
Yeah, no, that really is the implication. Yeah, strongly. And that's kind of the concern as well. Lack of oversight is the issue. Yeah, Trump. I don't think Trump was briefed in. I agree.
If he was, it probably went in one ear and out the other. He was probably busy doing something else.
Well, I mean, he's referenced it a few times, and he's referenced Roswell as well. But when you listen to the content of what he refers to, I think it's clearly he's had a briefing from the UAP task force, because he's talking about the pilot sightings and things like that.
Yeah.
So he hasn't had a briefing by these special access programs, as far as I can tell.
So yeah, so go on. The special access program. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's all right. So Grush found these programs, and that's what we'd said that, hadn't we? And then he went to the Inspector General's office and lodged this complaint, which they formally have to investigate. It's what they do. They're essentially the police of the intelligence community. And what they did is that they essentially passed him and his witnesses, because he brought witnesses with him. He wasn't the only one that testified. So this office is probably in possession of the evidence we're all looking for at the moment, but it's classified. So, not the hardware, but there are rumors to be documents and pictures among in all this, not to mention the testimony from multiple insiders, who were clearly in the positions they claim to be. I've said this before. Bob Lazar, he had some interesting information, and he may or may not have been out to Area 51S4. The reason we don't know for sure is because Bob Lazar couldn't even prove his educational background. And so that leaves a real big question mark there. Whereas Grush is absolutely who he says he was. And not only that, his bosses have backed him up as well from the task force. And there's quite a few people backed him up.
Yeah. Go on, David.
Yeah, I was just thinking that all good stuff there, Lee, but I still don't think they'll go for a full disclosure. I think they'll still try and keep it under wraps as much as possible, because I think there's too many ramifications. If they made an announcement that we're definitely not alone and that we're being attacked in various ways by these unfriendly ones, and of course there's friendly ones as well that do good things to abductees. I know a few personally who've benefited from their abduction experience.
Could you give us an example of that, David?
There's bad ones. Example of the good experiences.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to mention any names. Just...
Yeah. Oh, well, improved attributes and skills like art, photography, singing, The family, one case of family were abducted off the M5 some years ago, and the two daughters suddenly shone at school. One particularly, they didn't know what to do with her because she was right at the top class they could ever think of to put her. So her intelligence is improved, and their attributes and their skills. Some have had medical procedures fixed or improved upon, physical injuries, miraculously fixed. In a way, just like Jesus Christ used to do his healing, because Jesus Christ, in my belief, was a hybrid ET. And Mary was abducted and implanted with Jesus, and he was sent here to try and sort us out and fail these stupid human beings with the Romans and whatever was going on at the time. And he failed, and they ended up putting him on the cross and killing him. So there's clues. Robert Hulls is very much au fait with things in the Old Testament, and there's plenty of clues in the Old Testament of the Bible pointing to external involvement with human beings over the millennia. And I think the church leaders have altered, they've written the Bible basically, and hidden things and twisted things around, and want to create an impression of the power of the church, particularly the Roman Catholics. So if the full disclosure came out, it would send all the mainstream religions in a flat spin, particularly the Catholics, in my belief.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you there.
So that's one of the reasons why I don't think we'll ever get it. There's too much pressure on the United States government. And in case what they're trying to prove and say, there's so much evidence out there, it's almost a joke, in my opinion, of them trying to say about certain information they have stacked up in the Pentagon or wherever. And you think if every Air Force practically around the world have had interactions and intercepts with craft, scrambles like that Cyprus event I've mentioned.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and what they're doing to the animals and unfortunately human beings, and I've quite a few human cases now in my file with pictures. And the MO, again, is very similar to the MO on certain regions of the animals. So, but echoing Dr. Fremont, Professor Fremont's comments about that poor Brazilian man, I don't see how we could do this. And he's talking about the medical profession and his knowledge and profession as a pathologist that deals with murder cases and this sort of thing, for the Manchester Police. I find it amusing in a way, in a sad way, all this hoo-ha and the media making hay about what the Americans are releasing or not releasing, when there's so much information already out there. Organisations like our MOD, our Ministry of Defence, and the Air Force head people have enough information to hand, like these Cyprus events, which were just 2 within 48 hours in 1958, and the reactions to the MOD when that happened to the people who witnessed it. To me, what more do you need? It's just ridiculous. Yeah, well, I get a bit frustrated with all this carry on the media make about people like David Grush being a whistleblower and all the rest of it. But it doesn't. I'm hoping wrong. It doesn't just fizzle out.
No,
another the Muslim.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting what you're saying there. That there's an awful lot of information out there now. I mean, obviously in the era that we're in now of being able to access any amount of data and information online, and obviously people like ourselves talking about these things now. Any number of people out there who have had experiences. I mean, I was talking to my last podcast like a couple of weeks ago was about Calvin Parker, who sadly, obviously, passed away recently. But I was talking about, his particular case. Again, I mean, it's a very famous case. But, there are any number of people who have had similar experiences over the years. And so I agree. I think it's almost amusing that, the American authorities in particular are sort of trying to drip. I think they are trying to drip feed information out to people. But I also think you're right, David, in that there are, interested parties, vested interests, whether it be religious or industrial or political,
Yes.
who are trying to stop the information coming out, because you're quite right. It would throw the whole of society into complete panic and chaos if somebody came on the news now and said, actually, this alien sat next to me is such and such a body from such and such a planet, and they've been coming here for years, and we're not alone, and blah blah blah. So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see where they go with it.
Yeah.
And certainly, I mean, it's certainly interesting as well. I think about what other governments know, because obviously it can't just be the American government. I mean, the American government likes to think that America's the center of the world and everything else.
They call all the shots.
Yeah, exactly. They call all the shots when
you want to be top dog.
Yeah, well, exactly. But there is obviously, and apologies to if anybody is listening to this podcast from the States. But obviously, like you said, David, our own military, and obviously military of other countries as well, will have had their own experiences.
Yeah, yeah.
No, absolutely. And I mean, it's actually part of the testimony, it's part of the information that's coming out, is that the Five Eyes allies are involved in this. It's not just America. I'm sure they do take the lead. But, just to address David's point really about if this is going to come to anything, we're actually at a crux point right now, because this has already come to something, and that is that there's new legislation been drafted, 64 pages of language, which will become law if it gets passed. It's been debated right now, and if it gets past the House, then it'll go to the President. It's called the National Defence Authorization Act. And this act allows Congress and the Senate to impose new laws, essentially, on the intelligence communities and the military. And it comes along with the budget. So they have to follow the laws, they have to comply with the new legislation to get the budget, although they're not instant, it does take a little bit of time. So what's in place right now is there's 64 pages of legislation, and it's called the 2024 Disclosure Act. And if you read through it, it basically compels any organization, even private organizations in the States, to release and reveal to the congressional side of government that information, including allowing, it will be Arrow will get the job essentially to go and audit it as well. And it goes much deeper than that. They have to give up, every agency has to give up every single document. There's going to be the creation of a board appointed by the president, I think a 9-member board, and they will decide what information. It's all presumed to be declassifiable, but obviously they do come with excuses not to, So if this goes through, then we might be in with a good chance of discovering that, these intelligence agencies have their hands on hardware, so it's all right. I study sightings, and I always will, but it's important for me to know if somebody's got the hard evidence there of a craft. Does that craft match with the witness reports we get in from the civilians? And I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
Is it a disc? Is it a tic tac or a triangle? Do the bodies look like the ones that are showing up in people's bedrooms? And I'm pretty sure they do. Do you know what I mean? And we may also learn something. It's like some of the information that's leaking out, which isn't confirmed, suggests that these, and we've heard this all along, really, a lot of these beings are manufactured. They seem to be manufactured. They seem to be all the same. And some of the most recent information is that they may be manufactured from materials found on Earth, so from animals and human parts. I don't mean cobbled together. I mean at the cellular level.
Yeah.
And if you've ever heard of the von Neumann probe concept,
No.
So it was proposed by von Neumann, and the idea is that it's a way to carry out space travel. Is that a civilization, instead of sending people out into space, they send a probe, which is, as now we'd call it AI, and that probe is fitted with the ability to find a destination of interest, set up base, start harvesting resources locally, and manufacturing the extra probes and whatever it needs, essentially. So if something like that had happened here thousands of years ago, set up under the sea or under the earth or out in the solar system, that might explain a lot of what we're seeing, including the animal mutilations and including the fact that these beings are non-human, but not necessarily extraterrestrial, because they may be being manufactured locally.
Yeah, and that could explain religion. Just going back to what you were saying before, David, about the Catholic Church, going back to looking at the Bible and similar teachings, similar writings from other religions, even going back to the ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, that those sort of religions, that could be an explanation of that.
Yeah, of course. Cargo cult, isn't it? So very possible.
Just mentioning religion for a minute. A week ago, I had a knock on the front door, and it was two nice middle-aged ladies who turned out to be. I never asked the question whether they were Jehovah's Witnesses. I think they possibly were, something similar to that.
Yeah.
And they started off by saying, "Oh, we're not from the government. What do you think of the government?" And I made some joke like, as the Irish commentator said, to be sure, the trouble with general elections is the government always gets in, which they thought was amusing. And the next thing she said, "And what do you think about the Bible?" Or writer said. Anyway, she became clear what they were really about. What they were, Bible bashers.
Yeah.
And they went away probably a bit shocked, a bit bemused, and a bit horrified when I pointed out what my beliefs were and what I'm into. So they scuttled off down the drive with their tails between their legs. But I mean, they were typical of the sort of people who follow, whether it's JWs or Latter-day Saints or whatever.
Yeah.
Any religion will be the same. I know I have one sister, my eldest particular, who's quite religious, and she's a big church goer, sings in the choir, pointing and what have you. And she's certainly not happy at all with what I'm doing, never has been.
No.
And she doesn't allow me to talk about it when she's here or I'm there at the house or in a flat.
Because some people take the religious writings literally, don't they?
Yes, they're completely sold in the church's doctrine.
Yeah, when you look back at when some of these texts were written, it is highly feasible that a lot of these stories that, let's say, for instance, are in the Old Testament, and I'm sure that there are writings and teachings in other forms of religious books as well, were because of the time when these events were supposed to have happened and the time when these events were recorded in these religious books, that our ancestors didn't understand what they were seeing in the same way that we would understand it today. So, so in other words, if we did see an alien, if an alien, an extraterrestrial did suddenly appear in front of you, we will probably think, oh, that's an extraterrestrial. 2,000 years ago, one of our ancestors might think, that's a god.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And so that's obviously the difference there, I think, which is really interesting, and I think it's a whole massive subject on its own, isn't it? Really, about religious teachings.
Yeah. I first became uncomfortable with it when I was 11ish, and I was attending confirmation classes in our church in Heaton Moor, St Paul's Church it was, and I thought, I felt at that age uncomfortable about this guy telling me his load of fairy tales, Bible events.
Yeah.
The young ones would like to hear this, but it was all leading up to you being readied for confirmation.
Yeah.
Confirmation class.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it then. I had misgivings about it then.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, we all have our views, don't we? We all have our religious views, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people who have very strong religious views and they firmly believe in their beliefs in the same way that we believe in ours. So, I would never criticize anybody for having a belief system which is different to mine. It's just I believe that those belief systems, the genesis of those, that's a joke. That's not a joke, actually. The how those religious beliefs and writings and teachings started, I believe that they actually came from a different place than somebody who literally believes everything that is written in their particular religious book. So, and I'm just very conscious of not upsetting people, let's say, who would have a different religious belief. But
I can recommend it as a ploy to get JWs off your doorstep and never to return. Yeah. Because if you show any interest or parallels with Bible teachings,
they do like to talk.
She started off, what did I think about the Lord's Prayer? That was it. She said that at one point.
Yeah.
So I think, well,
it's all very interesting.
Take it or leave it.
Yeah. It's all very interesting. Lee, are you what are you working on at the minute then? Because it's been a while since we spoke. I've been keeping up with your blog. What sort of stuff are you looking at the minute?
Well, not a lot at the minute, to be honest. I obviously keep at it, and I keep getting reports, some more interesting than others, but I haven't got anything right now. I've got several articles half written and 3/4 written. So yeah, I mean, one article I've almost got written is an interesting case, and it's one of those that, for me at least, frustratingly, I just don't have the answer to, whether it's a conventional object or an unconventional object. But this video was filmed on VE Day in Barnoldswick, above Barnoldswick. It's been on YouTube. It was 2020. In fact, it was May, so it was not far before the a couple of months before the Todman and Calf case, and not far away.
Yeah.
And if you look at the video, it looks really impressive. It looks like you've got a silver orb flying around, and it's changing direction, and it's flying all over the place. And the witnesses are really impressed. And what makes it so interesting to me is, one, it occurred over Barlick, but two, I've actually got a second witness with a second video of the same event. So it was about 9 o'clock. Both of these people were filming it because it was VE Day. They were, it was during towards the end of lockdown.
Yeah,
everybody was out having the garden parties, and so it's a really interesting video. But frustratingly, I've shared it with image analysts, and they're all of the opinion that they can't rule out a quadcopter drone.
Right.
And although at first that seems like a bit of a crappy explanation, when you really look into it, you can't rule it out. And the reasons are this is because in May, about 9 o'clock, the sun is very low. And I've done some tests where you send up drones and things, and you do get a bright reflection off it. So we can't rule out this probably is a reflection you're looking at rather than a self-illuminating object.
So, where was this sighted over?
It was over Barnoldswick, where I live.
Barnoldswick, right.
Yeah. And I got in touch with the local police, and they confirmed to me that it wasn't them, so I can rule out that it's a police drone. I've never been able to track down a drone pilot or anything, or any footage, and it's very erratic flight, so I would suggest that anyone that was piloting it wasn't filming, really. And the other interesting factor is I think if it was a drone, they would have had to have had the first person view helmet on, because it departed from the center of town right down to the low end of town, which is quite a distance, and there's no way the pilot could have had eyes on it essentially the whole time.
Yeah.
So there are some interesting elements to it. I can't rule out that it wasn't an unknown, if you will, as well. And for me, the history of sightings in this town alone because I've got a lot, at least 30, going back to the 60s. That keeps my interest open. So that's a case that it's open essentially, and I will publish this article eventually.
Yeah.
But if anything, it highlights the difficulties sometimes of trying to draw a firm conclusion, without enough information.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's very difficult, isn't it? So what's your blog address? Where can people
so I post my articles on Medium, so it's anomalous-I at medium.com. Okay. And if you put that in, I've got about 10 or 11 articles on there, I think, maybe more.
Yeah. I mean, one of the interesting ones that I read recently, and this is probably going back a while now, actually, is the was it over Corn, the portal, the elderly couple that you interviewed?
Yeah.
That was really quite strange to me.
Yeah, it's a brilliant report, that one. Yeah, do you want to go through it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you're okay to, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was 22nd of February. It was 2021. And it was in Cayton. Yeah, the witness was a gentleman called Ian Gibbons. And he was sitting watching TV, I think, but he had his window open and he likes to watch the stars and things. He's got quite a decent view over the hills where he lives. And he said that he noticed, first of all, this distortion in the sky, which is a really unusual aspect of it and a really, interesting part. And as he watched, this distortion sort of seemed to expand, if you will, get bigger. And then orange object, for lack of a better term, emerged out of it, is the way he described it. And he described it as oval shaped, more like an oblong, if you will, or an oval. And to his eye, this object was just hovering. The distortion faded behind it, and this object, in his mind, rotated towards him to become a perfect circle. So you've got, almost a gimbal type object here, if people are familiar with that gimbal footage.
Yeah.
And then as he carried on watching, he shouted his wife to come and have a look, and he went to get a pair of binoculars. And while she was looking at it, she described, and if anybody wants to read the article, it is on that website. There's interviews with him as well.
Yeah.
A set of red lights, equally spaced, going all the way around this sphere, this circle of orange light is how he described it. And he came back and he got his binoculars on it, and he's done sketches and things for us. And then it shot up, as he says, at 45 degrees or thereabouts, and hovered again. And then from his perspective, it appeared, he said it looked quite a bit fainter and a bit redder as it was higher, but he could still see it quite clearly. And then it appeared to rotate again, whereupon it looked like a disc, or as he said, a flying saucer. And then from a standstill, it set off twice as fast as a plane, he said, but accelerating as it went.
Yeah.
Towards Skipton. Right. So a little interesting aside there is that the moor there between Skipton and Cayton is Carlton Moor, which is the moor that Philip Mantle talks about quite a lot, because the Graham Birdsall, Tony Dodd and the Yorkshire UFO guys in the 80s, they went as far as to set a caravan up there because they were getting so many reports. So
wasn't Gary Heseltine a police officer up there, up in that area as well at one stage?
Yeah, I don't know if he was based in.
Talks about Carlton Moor quite a bit. I haven't spoken to him or interviewed yet.
My relief in Carlton Moor is where Tony Dodd and two other officers had their encounter.
Yes,
in 1970 something.
It is, yeah. So this is the moor. It's sort of, it's my view, if you will, from the town of Barnoldswick. So it's no surprise we get the reports here. Why? This is an active area, but it is.
And of course, Pendle Hill's close, isn't it, as well, to both of us? I mean, you're on one side of Pendle Hill and I'm on the other.
Yeah.
And of course, we've both come across various reports over the years of objects either on this side of Pendle Hill or on your side of Pendle Hill.
Yeah.
There are theories that it could be, the geology of the area that's bringing some of these objects in. We don't know, but I mean, it's certainly the whole area, isn't it? Really, Lee? It's quite a hotbed of UAP and UFO activity in this
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
northwest.
I mean, I sort of took a leaf out of Paul Sinclair's book, and I thought, right, I'll focus on where I am, and I'll reach out about 30 miles, and then any reports I get, I can easily go and interview the witnesses, and visit the locations and all that.
Yeah,
it makes it very practical, and then you can map that particular area.
mm.
So I mean, I can go as far as Ilkley in one direction, and as far as sort of Bolton. Not quite Bolton is where I sort of draw a line, because Mick McLaren's over that way, if you will. But
Yeah.
I wonder, we know Paul's in a hot spot, and this is a hot spot, and the various other hot spots. I do suspect that is the case, but you've got to wonder if it's a reporting bias as well, because people are active there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. That if you've got somebody such as yourself or such as Paul, who incidentally I'll be interviewing next week, about his documentary that's just put out.
It's very good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, if you've got an area where you've got very active guys such as yourself, Lee, and like Paul, for instance, then it can seem as if and Mick down at around Bolton and so on, it can seem like they are hotspots, whereas in fact there's probably other areas as well in between where things are being seen. It's just that you're not finding out about them because you're not spreading your net out as wide as you possibly could, because you want to concentrate quite rightly on a specific area.
Absolutely, yeah. And so the hope is that other people can fill in the blanks of the other locations, and if we could do that all across the world, I think it could prove fairly interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. So, well, I mean, we've covered an awful lot of stuff there. And as I said at the beginning, before we started chatting, we do tend to go off at a bit of a tangent at points, or I do like my guests to go off at tangents. Is there any contact details for you, David, in case anybody wants to get in contact with you or report anything to you?
Yeah, I can give you an email address and a phone number if you want.
Well, an email address would be fine if people want to contact you.
Yeah, it's David A. Cayton. That's Cayton.
Yeah.
At hotmail.com.
Okay. So if anybody's got any interest in cases, any mutilation cases or anything like that, they can drop you a line.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yes.
Yeah. And Lee, people can contact you through what's the best?
Sorry, on Facebook, yeah. UFOs over Pendle is a page I have on there, so people can contact me through there.
Yeah.
Or I do have an email, which is lee.om, Oscar Mike, that is.
Yeah.
At Hotmail. It's .co.uk, that one though.
Okay, no problem. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you both. Thank you both for coming on. As I say, we've covered a lot of subjects, and I'm sure we'll be able to have more discussions in the future. I'd certainly like to have you both back. And in fact, David, I'd like to talk to you about crop circles at some point, if that's okay. I'm just conscious that we've gone quite a long time on this particular podcast. So
if you've got a quick minute, I'll tell you a very quick short crop circle story if you're interested.
Yeah, sure, go on then. Yeah, before we sign off.
So I mean, guests might have to refer back to my previous interview where we talked about the Ford family businesses in Barnoldswick. But during that period of time, there was actually a crop circle in Barnoldswick, just on the outskirts of town. There was a cornfield at the time. And I heard about this circle, so I went down to investigate. Mel didn't tell me about it. I don't think he even knew about it, to be honest with you. But it was probably a couple of years into his experiences, so things had been in the paper, if you will.
Yeah.
So anyway, we got there, and it was a yin-yang formation, the classic black and white symbol. So, the best I could do at that time was get up a tree and have a look, try and get a picture and stuff, which I did. Yeah. But in order to investigate, what I thought is, well, how are you going to fake a crop circle if you're going to fake one? You're going to use a compass, essentially, aren't you? So I thought, well, I'll look in the center of the hole, and I'll see if I can find, in the circle, and see if I can find a hole. And sure enough, I did, and I found a stake hole. If you sharpen a stake, four sides, it was quite deep. In the center, and I thought, well, that's interesting. Could be a coincidence. So let me go, what would I do next? To create the small circle, you're going to have to put one in there, right? So I went and checked that, and there were one there as well. So, I'm not speaking for all crop circles, but I'm pretty sure a lot of them are art pieces. But that one certainly was man-made. And how ironic that it was made in a location that's so active, you know what I mean? And somebody like me who was like in the midst of investigating a really interesting case, comes across it and actually manages to debunk it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the crop circles are a whole different subject for discussion, aren't they? And as I say, it's one that I'd like to talk about with you guys at some point in the future, if that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you both on. Thanks for giving up your time. It's been a fascinating sort of hour and 15 minutes. I think we've been on now, almost an hour and 20 minutes. Really great subjects, really interesting stuff. Thanks very much, guys, and hopefully I'll speak to you both soon.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Craig.
No worries. Thank you.
Bye.
You can visit my website at www.craigbryant.co.uk. Paranormal Pendle will return, and remember to keep watching the shadows.